So welcome everyone. I am from the Arc of Greater Pittsburgh, which is an affiliate of Achieva. The Arc of Greater Pittsburgh supports Allegheny, Beaver, and Westmoreland counties. We have been around for over 70 years, so we've been here for quite some time. Welcome to Advocacy and Family Supports. That's specifically the team that I am on. I am Melissa Stiffen. I am one of the disability advocates here at Achieva. This is a picture of my family and I right on Lake Erie, which is one of our favorite places to be. We all love the water, swimming and boating. That's my son Kiefer in the middle. Kiefer has Down syndrome and autism, and again is going to be a 7th grader. I'm still not sure how that happens, but our family has been a long time, almost an all-time member of Westmoreland County. My husband and I grew up here and lived here most of our lives. So I just wanted to share a little bit about who I was. I have been with Achieva for almost 6 years now. My 6-year anniversary will be on September 4th, and time sure does fly. Started doing these webinar series. This will be the 3rd year, and it is absolutely one of my favorite parts of my job. So who we are, as a member of the Achieva family of organizations, we offer technical assistance and individual advocacy to families, students, adults with disabilities, transitioning to adulthood, government benefits, home and community-based services. So I always say that the spectrum of advocacy is pretty broad, and I could probably talk almost anything under that umbrella to support people. We also do a lot of work engaging in systemic advocacy. And then we also have and develop policy on disability and healthcare issues. And then here's just our little Achieva family tree: Achieva Support, Achieva Resource, obviously the Arc of Greater Pittsburgh. The Arc of Erie County is a newer affiliate. They've been with us for almost 2 years. The Achieva Family Trust, and then also Autism Connection of Pennsylvania. This is our geographic reach. As I mentioned, Arc of Greater Pittsburgh supports Beaver, Allegheny, and Westmoreland counties, and also then Arc Erie. This is Achieva's mission and vision. Achieva advocates with, empowers, and supports people with disabilities and their families throughout their lives. And that is true. We are one of the only organizations that truly supports people throughout the lifespan. 2 years ago, we changed Achieva Advocates with. It used to say Achieva Advocates for, but we changed it to with because we are advocating with people. We don't want to be advocating for people. So small word, but it has a big, big meaning. So I always like to point out that we did change that. And then these are our core values: respect, passion, ethics, change, and team. And here's a way you can contact us. Here's our phone number to reach the advocacy intake line, our website, or you can also go to the QR code with your phone. And without further ado, our first presenter this evening, Heather, is from McAndrews, Mehalick, I always say that wrong, Connolly, Hulse, and Ryan P.C. And Heather, I'll let you do your intro, but we are so, so grateful that you are here. Thank you for your time, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I can't thank you enough. And this is always an exciting and anxiety-producing time of year, back to school. So it's always a good idea, I think, for us to get together, for those who are parents of students with special education needs, who are providers of students, who work in schools and provide services, to just have a basic overview of what are special education students' rights under the federal laws. What we're mainly going to be talking about, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So the IDEA is, like I said, the federal law for which we pursue these matters. Students with special education students must be provided with what's called a free appropriate public education, or FAPE. We often hear that in my world. You'll hear that sometimes from school district providers. And that's pursuant, again, it's a federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. What is FAPE? What is a free appropriate public education? That is a program that must be reasonably calculated to afford meaningful educational progress in all domains: academic, social, emotional, behavioral, physical, developmental, in areas of communication. And this will happen through a proper, what's called an Individualized Education Program, or IEP. A couple things to remember here. So a program that is reasonably calculated to afford meaningful educational progress. So that means that a student is entitled to a program that is designed to help them make progress. It doesn't always work, but the law provides that if things aren't working, we need to go back. That's why we do progress monitoring, to ensure that if something's not working, we're going to go back to it within a reasonable time frame and make changes. But the program should be based on what the student's needs are. And we're going to talk about what we mean by evaluating a student's needs. And then the other major thing to remember here is that we're not just talking about academics. I actually had a parent come into my office just this past week, and they were under the impression that IEPs were only to address academic needs. That is something that I think is often misunderstood. IEPs absolutely are designed to address the student's academic needs, but also their social needs, their emotional needs, their behavioral needs, their speech and language needs, occupational therapy needs, physical therapy needs, any other, if a student has any other needs that require specially designed instruction, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means. Eligibility under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There are several categories for which a student can be identified as a student with special education needs. These are several of them. Autism, one thing to remember I like to point out about autism is it is quite a spectrum. So, and I think that's important for providers, parents typically understand this very well, but providers and school district personnel, that a student with autism may have needs that are, they may be functioning on the low end of the spectrum to the high end of the spectrum and anywhere in between. So, and I say this because it's not uncommon for me to hear things like, well, this student doesn't seem like they have autism to me. And that's typically based on the individual's idea of what they've seen autism. And so I think it's very important to understand that we need to be very careful that autism could be very different for one student than it is for another student. Emotional disturbance is another one I usually like to touch on, because that is, again, it's a very broad category. A student who has emotional disturbance, there are several factors that a student could qualify under emotional disturbance. And as long as, so for example, if a student has behaviors that are impeding upon their needs, or emotional, if they're having trouble regulating their emotions, trouble getting along with their peers or teachers. And so long as these things are happening on a regular basis and to a significant degree, and having an adverse impact on that student's ability to make meaningful educational progress. And again, when we think of meaningful educational progress, it's not just academics. So if that student's struggling to have social relationships, or again, being able to connect and regulate their emotions and identify their emotions. So a student with emotional disturbance may not be a student where we may typically think of a student that's having engaging in behaviors. It may also be a student that is socially withdrawn, that isn't able to make those social connections with their peers. Intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, or hearing impairment, excuse me, deaf and blindness and deafness, I think are pretty well self-explanatory. Or other health impairment, another one I like to touch on. This is typically where attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is going to fall, but other health impairment could be a variety of disabilities that fall under that. So it may be a student that has central auditory processing disorder, for example. But I like to touch on this when we talk about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because again, just some commonalities that I see. So sometimes students with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, there's a question of whether the student needs an IEP or a Section 504 plan. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between those. But in a nutshell, if a student needs what's called specially designed instruction, so they need something beyond what a typical student, and they instruction beyond what a typical student would need, then they're going to need an IEP. If a student doesn't need instruction, but needs accommodations, so a 504 plan would be the course of action for a student that just needs accommodations. And what we mean by accommodations is it's not actual instruction. It's could be things in place that will accommodate the student's needs. So for example, if a student has an allergy to something, a 504 plan works very nicely because we would accommodate that student's needs. We would make sure that they are in a, for example, if they have a peanut allergy, there's a peanut-free environment that they're in, that no other students are going to have any peanut filled ingredients in their lunches and be close to the student. So we're going to accommodate that student's needs. When we talk about a student with ADHD and we're questioning whether does that student need a 504 plan or an IEP, if the student has such mild ADHD where we just need to accommodate them in terms of, okay, maybe they need extra time on their assignments. Maybe they need to be in a distraction-free environment when they're taking a test. Those are things that could be addressed through a 504 plan. If, on the other hand, you have a student with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that does not have those executive functioning skills, meaning those skills to plan and organize and transition appropriately, then they're going to need some type of instruction in those areas. So students may need, if they need some type of instruction in planning, organizing, or transitioning, then that would be a student that will require an IEP. Some more eligibility categories under the IDA: traumatic brain injury, visual impairment, developmental delay, speech and language impairment, and specific learning disability. Just a couple that I like to touch on that are a little more vague. Specific learning disability, this is when a student has a discrepancy between their cognitive abilities and their academic achievement. What it means is that they have the ability to achieve at a level where they're not achieving right now. And that's because they're not receiving the proper instruction that they need to achieve at their cognitive ability. So for example, if you have a student that has basic reading skills deficits, and to a significant degree, this will typically happen, for example, with a student that may have a diagnosis of dyslexia. So they struggle to sound out words. They struggle with those basic reading skills of phonological processing. So you might have a bright child who has an average or above average IQ, yet when we test their academic achievement in reading, their basic reading skills, decoding, they're falling significantly below what you would expect given the child's cognitive ability. That is going to be the identification, that's going to warrant an identification with the specific learning disability. You can have specific learning disabilities in reading, written expression, math, oral language. So these are areas that when we see a student with a specific learning disability, the goal is to close that gap between their ability and achievement. And that happens through providing appropriate research-based programming. And that means, what I mean by research-based programming is program that has been designed to address their needs and has been proven to be effective. So there's been studies that have shown that this program works for this need. So for example, if a student has a basic reading skill deficit, decoding or phonological processing, there are programs designed to address those needs that have been proven to be effective for those needs. Speech and language impairment is another one I just like to touch on really quickly, because it is an area that I see that is often overlooked or not understood as well as it needs to be. Speech and language is so essential. It is essential in our academic skills, reading and written expression skills. It is essential in our social, in communicating with our peers and communicating with our teachers and staff. It is essential with regard to our emotional needs as well, and our behavioral needs. And I say this because oftentimes if you have a student that, and they may be identified with autism, they may be identified with emotional disturbance or just speech and language impairment, but they have difficulties communicating their needs and wants. Maybe it's because they have expressive language deficits. Maybe it's because they have articulation deficits. Maybe it's because both. But if so, they can sometimes struggle to communicate effectively. And those can often lead into difficulties with their peers socially, difficulties behaviorally with their teachers and peers. So I think it's important to remember that when we're dealing with a student that has speech and language needs, to also see how those speech and language needs are impacting them socially, emotionally, behaviorally, as well as academically. Because if a student's struggling with speech and language, that is often can impact their reading and written expression needs as well. So free appropriate public education also means that students must be placed in what's called the least restrictive environment, or LRE, consistent with their needs. Some of you may have heard this term before, may have heard teachers say, well, we need to make sure we're providing your child the least restrictive environment. What this means is special education students must be educated with their typically developing peers to the maximum extent appropriate. So we want students to be with their regular education peers to the extent appropriate. We certainly don't want to take a student that, for example, has a learning disability and needs learning support for an academic area and put them into a regular education setting if that's not what they need. We don't want to take a student, for example, that needs life skill support or autistic support and put them into a regular education setting if they need more support. However, we do want to start with that regular education setting and work our way out. And the law says that special classes, separate schooling, other removal from special education students from that regular education environment should only occur if the nature, severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. And that means the full range of special education supplementary aids and services should be implemented. And so sometimes what happens is if a student has been demonstrating social, emotional, behavioral needs, and the school will come and say, oh, well, we need to place your student into an out-of-district placement. Maybe it's a partial hospitalization program. Maybe it's a private school. Maybe it's out in another district where they have a more restrictive autistic support or emotional, so, you know, a full day of emotional support. The law says that we need to make sure that that doesn't happen before we've attempted the full range of supplementary aids and services in that child's least restrictive environment, in that child's regular education school building. So we don't want to just, you know, first time the child has any issues, just take them out and put them into another program without trying to implement more supports and services. Again, there's a law, it's actually a beautiful case law called Oberti versus Board of Education that discusses this, that schools must provide the full range of supplementary aids and services, and they must make efforts to modify the regular education program to accommodate a special education student. So it's not, oh, well, we don't have that available in regular education. No, we need to modify that regular education program to accommodate the student's needs. So, you know, there's a lot we can do in that regular education setting before we would move them out. Again, if the student needs more supports and services, well, then they may need to be moved out, and may need to be moved out for only maybe part of their day. They should not be removed from the education in age-appropriate regular education classrooms solely because the general education program needs to be modified. Accommodations and supports must be provided as necessary to make meaningful educational progress, to allow maximum integration with non-disabled peers, and to participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities. So that means that even when it comes to those extracurricular activities after school, that the law says that students must be provided with accommodations and supports so they can meaningfully participate in those activities. That's also the case for field trips. I have heard on more than one occasion that school districts have said to some of my clients, oh, your child can't go on this field trip because we don't have the support or services to accommodate their needs. That's not permitted. The students should be permitted to go on field trips with their, all students should be able to go on class field trips. And if they need more supports and services, if they need a one-on-one aid, for example, then that should be provided to them. Child Find is the area of the IDA that provides for the services initiating. So the local educational agency, the school district or charter school, must have in effect policies and procedures to ensure all children with disabilities that are residing in Pennsylvania, including children with disabilities who are homeless, including children who are attending private schools, and regardless of the severity of their disability, if they are in need of a special education or related service, such as speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, orientation and mobility, vision services, that they are identified, located, and evaluated, okay? So again, it's all students, even students that are in private schools, even students that don't have an address. Any child that is suspected of having a disability and in need of special education, even if they are progressing from grade to grade. So they don't have to fail a grade to need, hey, with this child might need special education. And even highly mobile children, including migrant children, fall under this provision that they must be identified. So this means that before we move into evaluation, this means that yes, parents can come and ask for a special education evaluation for their child. They can write a letter, they can have a meeting. It's always good to put it in writing. You know, my child is demonstrating X needs, you know, whatever they may be. I believe that they should be evaluated for special education. And at that point, then the district should either offer permission to evaluate or issue what's called a notice of recommended educational placement, denying that request for an evaluation. And then that parent could reject that and file for due process if they disagree. But so parents can request an evaluation, but the law says, the federal law, the IDA, says that it is the obligation of school district personnel, the teachers who work in the school, the service providers, the administrators, that if they have any reason to believe, if there's any suspected disability that child should be referred for a special education evaluation. So if this child is struggling academically, even with the regular education supports that are in place, that child's still struggling. If that child's having a difficult time communicating, either because of articulation needs, but also because they're struggling, if they're having a hard time expressing their language needs, or they're having social difficulties, if they're having emotional difficulties, if they're having behavioral difficulties, if they're having handwriting difficulties or fine motor difficulties, sensory difficulties, physical therapy difficulties. These are all things that if the school district personnel see that there's a student struggling in those areas, they should be referring them to a special education for a special education evaluation. What does that evaluation need to cover? The scope of the evaluation, it needs to be sufficiently comprehensive to identify all of the student's special education needs and related services, whether or not linked to the disability category in which the child has been classified. And what that means is, let's say the parent requests an evaluation because they're worried that their child's struggling academically. And lo and behold, during that evaluation, there's some testing that's completed that starts to suggest, oh, there might be a speech and language need here as well. Well, then the district should take that a step further, issue a permission to evaluate, to say, okay, we want to add a speech and language evaluation to this. Or they start to see, hey, there's some maybe possible handwriting issues here. Let's issue a permission to evaluate to include an occupational therapy evaluation. Again, whatever the evaluation is evaluating for, we need to sufficiently evaluate those needs. But if we start to see something else along the way, we want to make sure we're covering everything. Initial evaluation is required when, again, there's a reason to suspect the child has a disability and needs special education. Parents have the right to obtain an independent educational evaluation, often at public expense. So this means that when a student has been evaluated by a charter school or a school district, your local educational agency, and the parent gets that report back or the guardian gets that report back, and either it does not find your child eligible for special education and you feel, oh my gosh, well, I really think my child is eligible, or it doesn't sufficiently evaluate all of the needs that were warranted, a parent can request an independent educational evaluation. That means that they're requesting the school district to pay for a private evaluation, someone or some people, depending on where the deficiencies are. So it could mean a psychoeducational evaluation, a speech and language evaluation, occupational therapy evaluation, a functional behavior assessment, just the areas where the parent believes have not been sufficiently assessed. So the parent would request that evaluation. Then the district has, before we get into IEPs, the district can either agree to that request to an independent educational evaluation and say, okay, who would you like to use? And the parent can choose their evaluators, or the district can say, no, I'm sorry, we believe that we've sufficiently evaluated your child, and they should issue what's called a notice of recommended educational placement, denying that request, and then file for due process because they're not agreeing to the independent educational evaluation. So the district would then have the obligation to prove that their evaluation sufficiently evaluated the child. Now let's talk about IEPs, okay? And this is the heart of special education. The evaluation tells us what the student's needs are. The IEP is the contract, the plan, the program that is based on that evaluation to address all of those needs. So it's really important to have a sufficient evaluation. And that's why if you don't feel your school district or charter school has evaluated sufficiently, it's really important to pursue that independent educational evaluation. Once we get a sufficient evaluation, we can develop an appropriate IEP, Individualized Education Program. And we're going to go through the components of an IEP, and I'll explain each of them to you. An IEP is a written statement for each child with a disability. It is developed, reviewed, and revised in a meeting with parents and relevant professionals. It is an annual document. It is intended to be from the time it's created for a year. However, it can and should be revised as necessary. So if we're starting the school year and your student is starting off with an IEP, and we develop that IEP the first week of school and it looks great, everybody's hopeful. 2 months, 2.5 months, 3 months into the school year, we're not seeing any progress. We're seeing the students still struggling in their areas of need, whether it be academic, socially, emotionally, behaviorally. We can call another IEP meeting and we could say, you know what, I don't think I'm seeing any progress here, certainly not meaningful progress. I'd like to go back, have another IEP meeting and see what programmatic revisions we can make, or if we need to add some accommodations, whatever it may be. IEP components. So the one in the beginning, sort of towards the beginning of the IEP, there's a statement of the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So you might see in here information from report cards. But I also like to talk a little bit about what those present ed levels, PELs for short. So report cards versus present ed levels. Report cards could be one component of that present education level of academic performance, but it certainly shouldn't be the only thing. We should have information about, there should be information from teachers, input from the teachers, input from the parents. There should be information from standardized testing that was completed, maybe academic achievement testing. Maybe there's been some social emotional assessments completed. We need information for that. If the student has autism, we might have some autism assessments that were completed and the information from that, speech and language information, occupational therapy information, maybe from a functional behavior assessment, you might have that. And again, that information should also be specific. This component of the IEP, the present education levels, academic performance and functional performance, is where we're going to get the information to develop the goals. And the goals are really important because that's what we want the child to achieve at the end of that annual IEP term. So developing those goals, we go back to the present ed levels, we need that information to see. So we don't just, for example, want something that says that Mary's struggling in reading. Okay, well, what do we mean? Is she struggling in reading comprehension? Is she struggling in decoding, being able to sound out words and phonologically process them? Is she struggling in how quickly she reads? That's reading fluency. So we need more specific information when it comes to all areas. So that's academics. We don't just want something that says, Roger is having behavioral problems or struggling to get along with his peers. Okay, well, what's happening? What are the specific behaviors that we're seeing? How frequently are we seeing those behaviors? When are those behaviors occurring? When don't those behaviors occur? So again, we want that more specific information. And then from that information, we're going to develop a statement of measurable annual goals. And these should include all areas of need, academic and functional goals. So you may have a student that has just a few goals. You may have a student that has many goals. It all is going to depend on what that student's needs are. I do get nervous sometimes. I just did a file review earlier today where a student was identified with autism, has significant academic needs, social needs, emotional needs, language needs, occupational therapy needs, and the student only had one math goal and 2 occupational therapy goals. again, all the goals need to address all of the students' needs. So we want, if the student has social skills deficits, we need social skills goals. If the student has language deficits, we need language goals. If the student has academic reading deficits, math, we need goals for every area of need. What do we mean by measurable? So that means that when we're looking at a goal, that we need to be able to progress monitor and measure the student's progress from point A to point B. So we're, over time, we're measuring the entire year. However, we're going to do progress monitoring throughout the school year. That may be quarterly, that might be weekly, again, depending on the need, depending on what we're measuring. So if we're doing progress monitoring, we need to have a goal that we're actually able to measure that progress. So for example, we're not going to have a goal that says, Timmy will make progress in reading. Timmy will progress from first grade to second grade. That's too general. We need to have that, what are the specific areas of reading? And we want them based on some type of standardized assessments, some type of progress, something we can progress monitor. So we can say, Timmy is reading at, is able to decode words at the 1.5 grade level, and by the end of the school year, we want them to progress to the 3rd grade level. Depending, again, that also is going to depend on what we can expect from that child, given their cognitive abilities. If we're assessing areas of behavior, we want to have actual, something that we can progress monitor. So if the child, for example, is eloping from the classroom, that's something we can measure. Okay, how often are they eloping? Are they eloping 3 times a day? So we want them to, obviously the goal should be that we want 0 elopements. So we can progress monitor. Progress monitoring, I also want to touch on, again, because we're starting back at the school year, comparing last year's IEP goals to this year's IEP goals. So if your student, if your child had an IEP last year and they're having a new annual IEP, if those IEP goals are the same, that's usually indicative that, okay, what we're doing isn't working here. So take a careful look at that and make sure that the IEP goals are changing, that they may be the same in terms of the skills we're working on, but they're increasing in grade level. But again, are they making progress? Is the child making progress? If those goals are, you're seeing the same goals over time, that's indicative that the child's not making progress, and we need to go back and make some revisions to the IEP. Maybe the program we're using isn't working. The IEP should also have a description of how the child's progress toward meeting the annual goals will be measured. So how are we measuring that progress? Are we using standardized assessments to measure the progress? Are we using some type of tally or score sheet to measure the progress, a point sheet to measure the progress? That should be in the IEP. And then when are periodic reports provided to the parent? So are we providing that? Typically, you're going to see quarterly. When I have a student that has more significant needs, especially if they're in the areas of behavior or speech and language, I do like to see more frequent periodic reports to parents, because you don't want to wait until the end of a quarter to have a student that has significant behavioral challenges to report to the parents that, hey, you know, we're still having all these same behavioral challenges. Maybe if we gave the parent more progress monitoring along the way, we could work together to come up with other ways to address that, those needs, and make some changes, make some programmatic changes, so we're not waiting till the end of a quarter. The IEP also should include a statement of the special education related services and supplementary aids, again, based on peer-reviewed research, research-based programming, to the extent practicable, and a statement of the program modifications and supports for schools personnel. So what does the school, what do the school people need to help support the students? So for example, if you have, let's say you have a child that has been diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome, not a very, very common diagnosis, and maybe something that a lot of the staff who are working with that student don't really have a thorough understanding of. It's not something, ADHD is more common, other other diagnoses are more common. So a good idea would be to have someone come in and do a training of Tourette's syndrome, and so to support the program modifications and support the school personnel. Hey, let's help them better understand this student, especially because they have a more a less common disability, and let's help them understand what post-traumatic stress disorder. If you have a student that has post-traumatic stress disorder, you're really going to want to have a staff that is knowledgeable in what types of, that trauma-informed strategies. So again, having that in the IEP, that we're going to do training sessions with our staff to help them better understand this student who has this disability that we have to address. An explanation of the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate with non-disabled peers in the regular class and in other school activities. So this student is not going to participate in regular education English language arts because they're going to be in learning support for English language arts due to their specific learning disability in reading and written expression. This student is not going to participate in academics. They're going to have their academic settings in a autistic support classroom rather than a regular education. So to what extent they're not going to be participating with typically developing students. Location change and the impact of transitions, including new building and classrooms. So this is, again, thinking about the beginning of the school year. Are there any changes? Are we changing from elementary school to middle school? Are there changes from middle school to high school? Do we have a change from, maybe we're going from now from one life skills classroom to another life skills classroom? We really want to make sure that those transitions are addressed. And if your student struggles with transitions, that there's a solid, appropriate transition plan in place for those kinds of transitions. Again, thinking about that with the beginning of the school year. A statement of individual appropriate accommodations that are necessary to measure academic achievement and functional performance of the child on state and district-wide assessments. So this is going to be your section of whether your child's taking the PASSR, the PSSAs, and just if they need any accommodations with regard to that. When we talked about before, the supplementary aids and services, so the full range of supplementary aids and services to be implemented, again, these should be implemented in the least restrictive environment, but also if it needs to happen in a more restrictive environment, these are examples of specially designed instruction. Direct instruction in a small group setting. So if your child has a learning disability and needs that learning support setting where they're getting that research-based instruction, and making sure that this is something that parents really need to do too. Is the research-based program that my child's receiving actually appropriate to address their needs? So there are research-based programs for everything. And reading, written expression, math, social skills, emotional skills, behavioral skills, there are research-based programs. So if your child, let's say, has a reading decoding issue, so they're struggling to sound out words, they're struggling to phonologically process, your district is offering a research-based program, which, hey, that sounds great, but it's a research-based program that's designed to address reading fluency, which is how quickly a student reads. That is not going to address the decoding needs. So we want a phonics-based program for decoding needs. We want fluency program for fluency needs. We want for comprehension needs, we're going to want a research-based program for comprehension. If we're talking about social skills, for example, what social skills are we talking about? Are we talking about, there's a variety of social skills deficits. We want to make sure that we're utilizing a program that's age appropriate, that's appropriate for your child's cognitive abilities, that's appropriate for your child's needs. So ask questions. What research-based program are you providing? And ask us, is this, what age is this designed for? Can you provide some examples of some of the strategies and tools that are used? And then go home and Google the program and learn about it yourself and see, okay, does this sound like this makes sense for my child? Another supplementary aid or specially designed instruction, a one-on-one aid. Pulling your student out of a regular education classroom because they need more support, that could be resolved with a one-on-one aid, so they don't need to go into a more restrictive setting. Scheduled and unscheduled breaks, access to a guidance counselor, extra time for assignments, tests, or homework, assignment reduction, visual, verbal, nonverbal prompting to remain on and complete tasks. Students should be provided with choices wherever possible. Again, these are just examples and may or may not be appropriate for each child. Reinforcement of positive choices, consistently catching good behaviors, a positive behavior support plan. We're going to talk a little bit more about a positive behavior support plan more specifically. Here are, in the IEP, there should be, if your child needs related services. And here are the variety of related services that are available under the IDEA. And there's another slide as well. So if your child needs audiologist services, counseling services, early identification and assessment, interpreting services, diagnostic medical services. So sometimes I hear parents tell me that, oh, my school district said I need to go and get, they think my child has autism, but they need to go get a medical diagnosis. No, they don't. They can identify a student with autism. And if they need to get they feel they need to get some sort of diagnostic medical services, that's a related service under the IDEA. Occupational therapy, orientation and mobility, parent counseling and training. And this is one that's often forgotten. Sometimes it's helpful for parents to get that counseling and training that they need to understand their child's needs. There's a lot of information, and maybe they're dealing with a whole lot, and they need support in helping to understand how they can help their child be more successful in their education. Physical therapy, social skills, psychological services, recreation, rehabilitation and counseling services, social work services, school health services and school nursing services, speech and language pathology, and transportation. Again, these are all under the IDEA. Transition plan. So from 14 years of age, your child's IEP should include a section where it should be based upon appropriate transition assessments and specifically designed to improve your child's academic and functional achievement. Services must be designed to facilitate the child's movement to post-secondary activities. So starting from 14 years old, because that way it gives us enough time to make sure that they transition appropriately and we've set them up for success in that post-secondary life, whatever that post-secondary life may be, whether they're going into a group home, whether they're going into a vocational program, whether they're going to college. We want to set that transition up starting from age 14 and help them along the way so they can successfully transition into post-secondary life. Positive behavior support. So this is a biggie because often forgotten. We want to make sure that positive behavior support is provided to students that have behavioral needs. What does the law require? And in this, there's a little bit of federal and state law. It must be research-based. Any type of positive behavior support must be based on research that has been proven to be effective. It must be based on a comprehensive functional behavior assessment. So that means that if a student is having significant behavioral needs that are impacting their ability to be successful in the educational environment, the school district should complete what's called a functional behavior assessment. And that's going to consist of typically the school psychologist doing observations over a period of time in different settings to determine what's the function of the behavior. So are these behaviors occurring in certain settings? Are they occurring with certain individuals? Are they occurring in certain times of day? Are they occurring when certain circumstances, maybe it's only happening when the student is having to do written work and they really struggle with written work. So we need to determine what the function of the behavior is. Positive behavior support must be based on positive reinforcement. So we should be reinforcing those good behaviors. Interventions must be the least intrusive necessary. Restraints only happen when there's a clear and present danger. So we don't restrain a child just because they're not listening to us or refusing to do what we want. It's only where that child is a clear and present danger to themselves or others. Anytime a student is restrained, there must be a written notice of restraint provided to the parent. The school district needs to provide a written report to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. An IEP meeting must be held within 10 days of restraint. Any restraints, if we're noticing that we're restraining a child and it's becoming, okay, it's not just once, we're having to restrain this child, there needs to be in the IEP, they must be used in conjunction with teaching socially acceptable alternative skills. So are we just restraining this child to manage behaviors, or no, we should be actually making sure we want a plan to eliminate the use of restraint. So we want to be teaching them ways that are socially acceptable so we don't have to restrain them. Staff should be trained. Plan to eliminate the use of restraints through positive behavior support. No prone restraints. I haven't seen this for a very long time. That would be a face down restraint. No punishment for manifestation of a disability. So you do see this from time to time, and sometimes you have a manifestation determination review, and there might be disagreement about that. But the law says, and this is a Pennsylvania law, that we cannot punish students for manifestations of their disability. That does not mean that they know the difference between right or wrong. It means that, is there something about their disability that's impacting? So for example, if a student has ADHD and they have impulsivity, and we have a student that maybe has brings into school, has in their pocket, they had something from over the weekend. Let's say they were out hunting with their dad and there was a pocket knife. Is that something that's a manifestation of their disability? That impulsivity of not knowing, forgetting that they might have had something in their pocket from the weekend. No locked room or room is where an exit is prevented. So we cannot, even if a student is eloping, we cannot take a student and put them into a room and either lock them in or even stand in the doorway and prevent them from exiting. That we might have to restrain them if necessary. But we can use safe rooms for children to go, for students to go, and this is a place for them to calm down and maybe have a support staff with them to talk with them, but we can't prevent them from exiting. And suspension for more than 10 consecutive days, so 10 days in a row, or 15 days all school year, is going to be considered a change of placement. And then that would trigger having to have a manifestation determination review to determine if the behavior is a manifestation of their disability. Almost done. I know I'm a little over time. Truancy in the IDEA. So just quickly, if anyone's dealing with truancy issues, if a student is truant, the school district should be conducting social emotional assessments or a functional behavior assessment to determine the reason behind the truant behavior. And then results of those assessments should be utilized into a positive behavior support plan. I often see students that are struggling with anxiety and their parents are, truancy charges are filed against them. And it's just that the child needs an IEP that's addressed, and it may be that they need some type of in-home instruction, and then to sort of build a transition plan back into school. First quarter check-ins and progress monitoring. So again, is your child making progress at that first quarter check? If not, do we need to go back and revise that IEP? Should we be looking at and considering different research-based programs? Ask those questions. Do we need to add services or accommodations to help my child be successful? And then I touched on this a little bit before, but a 504 plan is a broader definition of an individual with a disability. So it's any person who has a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more of such person's major life activities. Learning is a major life activity, has a record of such impairment, and is regarded as having such impairment. So you can, a 504 plan is easier to qualify for, but again, it's going to provide accommodations, a service plan, a Section 504 service plan with special education services and related services. Remedies under the IDEA. So if the school district has failed to provide your student with a free, appropriate public education, what is the remedy under the law? What happens? One thing is compensatory education. So we can't go back in time and have it done all over again, and let's do it right this time. So the remedy under the law would be a hearing officer could order hours of special education services, which is called compensatory education, that a parent could go out and seek private services to make up for those past failures. So for example, if a child's didn't get what they need for their reading disability, the parent could hire a teacher to come and teach and reading. If the child didn't get the speech and language services that they should have, the parent could go and get speech and language services. Appropriate program and placement. So if the school district or charter school is not providing an appropriate program or placement, you can seek that under the law. You can force, if you believe that your child needs, you can go to a hearing and have a hearing officer order the district provide what you believe your child needs if the hearing officer agrees with you. And then reimbursement for tuition or related costs for private placement. So if you believe my child's needs cannot be met in the school district and they need there's this private school for students with autism, and you could seek reimbursement for such a placement. Reimbursement for out-of-pocket costs if you've had to pay for tutoring, speech and language therapy, occupational therapy. These are things that you can seek as remedies. And this is just our offices and contact information. And I'm also happy to provide my email address. I can do that in the chat, which I think is right here. So I can provide my email address if that's easier for people as well.
Heather, thank you. You packed a lot into that 50 minutes. We appreciate it.
Sure. And if anyone has more specific questions or wants to talk to me, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can certainly email me. You can call me. I'm happy to, because I know I did sort of jam pack a lot of information into a short time. So we can talk about more specific questions, or if you're having any concerns, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. And if you leave the meeting and, a week from now or 2 weeks from now or 6 months from now, you're like, hey, I was just thinking about this, or I have a question about that, please feel free, reach back out to me. I'm happy to connect you with any of our presenters this evening. ARC of Greater Pittsburgh is happy to help you in any way that we can, whatever we can do to help. Don't feel like as soon as this meeting ends, the support ends. We want you to know we're still here. we're still here. All you need to do is reach back out. I did not see any questions in the chat, Heather. But I will definitely connect you with anyone who reaches out to me after the session this evening. And you're welcome to stay on for as long as you want to this evening. So without further ado, this is the second annual Back to School Power 2 Hour, which means we pack a ton of information into a 2-hour session. But our next presenters are from a different perspective. One thing I love about our webinar series is that we welcome all people into these spaces to be a part of these conversations. And, we really say it takes a village, and we should all be coming together to work to support students to be successful. So our next two presenters are going to share the parent perspective on how to get ready for back to school and how to support your students. I will let them share more about themselves, but without further ado, Dominique and Latoya, thank you guys for being here too. We really, really appreciate it. And yeah, so the floor is yours.
All right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Latoya Maddox. I am the co-facilitator of Momma Chronicles Too with Dominique, and we're here to present today on just getting your children prepared for going back to school. By day, I am a manager at the Center for Independent Living for Delaware, Chester, Montgomery counties. I'm a person who has a physical disability. I'm in grad school. I start next Monday, and my son, who is 13, goes back to school this Wednesday. So that's all I have about myself. You can go to the next slide, Melissa. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of why we do what we do. So a little bit of my personal story of becoming a mom. When I got pregnant with my son, all appointments went well. I was able to lead my prenatal team with my pregnancy because my disability is unique. I have arthrogryposis, which is a joint and muscle disorder. So I have very limited use of my arms and my legs, and I use a wheelchair to get around. So going back to my prenatal care, everything went well, except for I wasn't able to get weighed. And because of, family history of obesity and diabetes and all that other type of stuff, you want to just make sure you don't get like gestational diabetes during pregnancy is predominant if you gain too much weight too fast and not able to monitor your weight. And that's something that I ended up getting was gestational diabetes. But it was only like certain foods that I could keep down, which was the unhealthier foods. So I ended up like I said, gestational diabetes. Still wasn't able to get weight my whole pregnancy, but ended up having a emergency C-section, a healthy 5-pound, 12-ounce boy back in August 2011. And Dom, you want to share your personal story before I go on about Momma Chronicles Too?
Yes. So hello everyone, I'm Dominique Howell, Independent Living Specialist at Liberty Resources for Philadelphia County. My personal story of my why is for Momma Chronicles is a little bit more in depth than Latoya's because Latoya just wasn't able to get weighed. I wasn't able to get properly examined, properly weighed until I went on hospital bed rests because of complications during pregnancy. So I went on hospital bed rest at 6.5 months pregnant after becoming completely numb in my lower extremities and my upper extremities. And I also utilize a wheelchair because I have cerebral palsy. And so I thought this wasn't right, as I've been an advocate for some time at this point. My daughter is now 10, so this happened 11 years ago. And so I wrote to the director of obstetrics and family medicine and internal fetal medicine about their practices and not having accessible scales for people who utilize wheelchairs, and really try to make my voice heard. And so that's the short of my story. It's a lot longer, but for time's sake, I think you get the idea. We birth something out of our stories of not being advocated properly by the medical system. Go ahead, Latoya.
All right. So Momma Chronicles Too came about was in my second I had a 2-bedroom at the time. Dominique was in there. I had already had my son. A friend of ours had already or was pregnant with they had already had their child too, and Dom was pregnant at the time. So we're just sitting there and we're like, there's no group, there's groups for moms who have children with ID, DD, or a combination of both. But there's no groups for moms or parents who just have disabilities, and that's cross disability, who also may have children with disability. So it's the parent who has a disability and the child who has a disability, and that's the short of the story. And Dom decided to create Momma Chronicles Too. So we were meeting in at various locations at first, and then our friend, who was also a mother with disability, was like, let's see if the SIL in Philadelphia, which is Liberty Resources, it was only serving Philadelphia at the time, wouldn't mind if we utilize their space. And of course, they were like, no, sure, come on. And we've grown since then. So we now do most of our meetings on Zoom on a Saturday, usually late afternoon or later in the afternoon, because a lot of the moms that we work with or come to the group have to work. So we accommodate in that way. So that's a little snippet of Momma Chronicles 2 story. And to go on about Momma Chronicles 2, our mission, Momma Chronicles 2 mission as a support and advocacy group is to provide support to each mother and child that we serve, as well as communities that we surround. Our primary goal is to shed the stigma that society has placed on disabled parents and children. Momma Chronicles 2 was developed in 2014. Momma Chronicles 2 was brought to Liberty Resources in 2018, which I told you somewhat about. And we added a few statistics because Dom loves the numbers, and it just astonishes me how although time has gone on, the ADA passed years ago, Olmstead Act passed 25 years ago, and we're still so far behind and removed when it comes to parents with disabilities. And I'll read these statistics to you all. According to the Inside Edition, as of 2020, between 40 and 80% of parents with intellectual disabilities have lost custody of their children because of their disability. According to the National Council on Disability Study, which was done in 2021, pregnant women with disabilities are 11 times more likely to die at childbirth. And then the last one, according to PubMed, a study done in 2023 shows that 8.44% of pregnant women with disabilities receive prenatal care. And we've learned through moms who are outside of Philadelphia and outside of Pennsylvania altogether that a lot, like when one of the moms, they lived in Texas, they were saying like the moms were scared to even send their children to school or show up at the school because they knew that the school, because the stigma that the child would automatically, the parent would be a target for Child Protective Services, Child and Youth Services to be called on them. Now to the good stuff. Back to school prep. Here are a few of our recommendations, which we start before school gets back into play. So you should start with a sleep schedule, and you can start anywhere from like 2 weeks to a month prior, depending on your child. You, as parents, whether you have a disability or not, we know our children best, so we know how to get that pattern in the schedule created for them for bedtime, and when they wake up in the morning. Creating a daily calendar of morning and evening routines. That's in the morning, make sure you get up, you brush your teeth, wash your face, get dressed, make sure your book bag is by the front door, your shoes are by the front door, and then the evening routines when they get home. I know for my son, who has ADHD, he needs at least 15 to 30 minutes break from traveling from school when he gets home, just to give his mind a break, and then to get into the homework. And the morning routine for my son also likes to, he's not a lollygagger, he just likes to take his time and make sure everything's prepared, because he's at that age now, waking him up a little bit earlier, so he has that time to prepare, lollygag around, and still be able to get himself prepared. Preparing all school supplies in the child's backpack. And I know for my son, from last year to this year, I'm going to wait for the teachers to tell me some of the stuff that they need, because last year he would come home with a lot of stuff not used, and it was just all over the place. So I was like, okay, we're going to see what the teachers ask you for and what you need. But today he did say he needed a binder, so I'm going to get him a binder. Practicing and memorizing the school schedule. That's, his class schedule, and, the routine around the house, for preparing for school, even on the weekends, because Sunday, you back to regular bedtimes and things like that. Usually Fridays and Saturdays stay up a little longer, but not that much longer. Practicing when and how to take medicine at school. So, I make my son, he has to take meds in the afternoon, so make sure it's give it to him after lunch so that he knows, like, all right, after lunch, I have to make sure I go to the nurse to get my medication, so that he won't come home all cranky and out of sorts. And then collaborating with all community supports so that everyone can work together. That's just making sure the whole team, my son has an academic advisor. He has a behavioral health clinician that goes to school. His father, who we co-parent, so we're in separate homes, but we're still on the same support system, aunts, uncles, and everybody. Just making sure that everybody's on the same team, and we all work together to make sure the child is successful, because next year is high school, and that's a whole big transition. So, Dom, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Thank you.
So, just to go on my daughter. My daughter has invisible disabilities, a plethora of them, and so we are in the process of preparing her and preparing the school, because things have changed, diagnoses have changed, medication has changed, and so my big prep, beside preparing her, is preparing the school. Even though this is a school that is an approved private school and they are well aware, it's still important in our work as advocates to make sure that the school is individually prepared for your specific child. So these are our recommendations given what we've seen with our children who both have invisible disabilities. Gathering all medical forms and notifying the school of medication needed in school. So even if they know, so she's returning to school and they know she had medication, but now the medication has changed. So it's very important to make sure that medication is a top priority. My daughter takes medication 3 times a day at school, so it's very important that they are aware, because if she misses a dose for whatever reason it is, um, you know, it could really throw her off. So, this is specifically for a child who is in a secular school and not an approved private school that is familiar with the 504 or IEP, because what we have seen in Philadelphia is that even if the school is aware, quote unquote, what an IEP is, they are not good advocates for the children. And so it is really important to notify each teacher of your child's 504 and IEP needs and accommodations so that the school and everybody is on the same page, because without that, there will not be a successful school year. And then a lot of times we have to get someone like the first presenter to come in and do her fabulous job to advocate on our behalf. But we would like to not be able to do that. And so we want to be the first advocates in making sure that the child has all 504 and IEP needs and accommodations. So my child, this was a specific recommendation that I put in, is allergic to everything. She needs a bubble. And so I, even though the doctor provides an allergy anaphylactic plan, they still lose it. And so I give a copy to each teacher of all the allergies, and then it's hung up in each classroom that she goes in, even the gym, 2 in the lunchroom, because her allergies are so severe that they can cause anaphylactic shock. And if your child is in a secular school, it is really important, because before my daughter went to the private school, she was in a regular school, and they were not accommodating of her sensory issues. And so when she asked for breaks, she wasn't getting them. And that's also because there was a school who, didn't have the proper emotional support, one-to-one staff. Next slide. And so it's really important. If your child has an invisible disability, specifically sensory issues, to notify each person of that if it is not in the IEP. If you're in a transition process from the 504 to the IEP, because I had to do 2 things. First the 504 and then the IEP. And in the midst of that, I still had to notify them of what the changes would be. Okay. So we think for our children that it is very important to have routines, because for both of them, and for a lot of the parents and children that we serve, we have realized that routines are the most successful when dealing with children who have disabilities, especially when going to school. It creates structure, it creates confidence, it creates team building, success. And so some of our recommendations are: set a 20 to 30 minute timer, excuse the typo there, for getting ready. Discuss the day's schedule with your child. So even if your child is nonverbal, but they communicate in a different way, it is still important to say, "Hey, Johnny, this is what is on today's schedule." And if your child is verbal, like my child, she's very anxious about going back to school and what the schedule will look like, even if she is sort of familiar. So it is very encouraging to her to hear me say, "Hey, Riley, in the morning at 9 a.m., this is the class. Then the next thing is this. Then you have break. Then you meet with your therapist. Then the cycle continues." It's so important. I've realized how much more successful she has been when she has a routine that she feels confident in. So, with that being said, during breakfast, what we do and what we encourage our parents to do is discuss what your current mood is before going into school. And what I didn't say in the slide, because it only allows for some room, is that if your child is in a bad mood or an off mood, what I suggest is that you contact the school if you have a relationship with them to say, "Look, right now, so and so is in, a certain kind of mood. So she may ask for timeout. She may need more redirection. She may just need more support and more praise or more positive reinforcement." So, and then ask the child, if appropriate, uh, what's their approach to how they're going to do their schoolwork and their other activities. How are you feeling this morning? If your schoolwork or activity is hard, how can you ask for help? Depending on their answer, seventh, eighth graders, I don't, so depending on their age and their temperament, try to encourage them to give you more than one word answers, just to invoke a positive reinforcement, a positive mindset going into school, especially if it's a transition from uh, elementary to middle or middle to high school. That I think that really is really beneficial. And then encourage your child to ask for breaks if needed, especially if it's an accommodation. I know at first when my daughter had her IEP in the regular brick and mortar school, she was worried and embarrassed to ask for breaks, even though it was in the accommodations to ask for breaks. She was embarrassed because of other children. She was embarrassed because she didn't understand why she needed breaks, even though she understood, but she felt so different and ostracized. So it's just a good way to encourage the evening routine. So again, I'm a big proponent on feelings. Reviewing your child's day and their feelings. So reviewing everything that happens, even if it's one word answers, at least and you can build off of that moving forward throughout the evening. Asking them their feelings. Was it a good day? What was good about it? Was it a bad day? What was bad about it? How can we change it for tomorrow? What can we carry over that was good from today until tomorrow? These are still good things for even children with disabilities because it promotes success. It promotes um, positivity. It promotes equality, diversity, inclusion, all of those things that there's might not be used to seeing with their peers that don't have disabilities. I think that it equals it out. Um, and then for my child, I'm going a little bit personal. She always needs to de-escalate from the day, right? Especially when she first starts back to school because she's overly excited. So we go through de-escalation practices. Um, and so now what we have decided we're going to do for this school year is paint. We're going to set out 30 minutes for a fun activity to de-escalate and paint and paint whatever she wants. If it's the whole bad day that happens, then that's what we're going to do. But it's just a fun routine. And, you got to make going back to school fun, especially there are kids who just don't like school for whatever reason and another. So you have to make it fun as the parent advocate. That's what I like to call myself, the parent advocate. And then the other part of the evening routine is asking your child about their schoolwork specifically. So, as an example, was it difficult? What was difficult about it? How did the teacher help you? Did the teacher not help you? Did you feel that you got positive reinforcement? In what ways were you happy about the schoolwork? Did did you feel that you're successful? Any language that you talk to your child about positivity and schoolwork, we promote. And then I have started to prepare my lunch, prepare my daughter's lunch with her, right? Because now she's older and now she wants to learn how to cook and do things. So even if your child is unable to do that, I think it's still important to have them present in the room. So one, that they feel, included, but also two, so that they know specifically what they're having. Preparing as positive as possible makes for a great back to school. It kicks the school year off tremendously well in my experience. And then asking your child how they want to prepare their clothes and book bag. So this is a thing that we have, as a mom, we have gone back and forth with me and my daughter, right? So she'll ask Alexa, what's the weather tomorrow? Alexa will tell her it's raining. I will say, Riley, pick out clothes that go with rain. She will pick out clothes that don't go with rain. And so we are having we have had in the past a constant battle of, I want to wear this, but it isn't safe to wear in the rain. I want to wear this, but it isn't safe to wear in the heat, X, Y, Z. And so what we have come to make a decision together is that we collaborate. She picks out one thing, I pick out another thing. It goes together. She's happy, I'm happy. She doesn't want this particular thing in the book bag. If it's not necessary, then we come together. It just helps to prepare and to alleviate stress of both the parent and the child. Homework routine. So our recommendations are: ask your child how they feel about doing homework before the beginning and if they understand it. So I didn't used to do this. And we used to have meltdown after meltdown after meltdown after meltdown because I'm like, okay, it's homework time. And then as time went on, I realized, like, let's see how she feels about doing it. And if she doesn't, then we wait and we do an activity. We'll paint some more, we'll play cards some more until she feels comfortable. And then we say, do you understand it? What don't you understand? How can I help? Do you need my help? How much of my help do you think you need? Do you think you'll be able to finish it all? If not, then that's when the parent advocate steps in and says, so and so has a difficulty with homework today. Here's a note. We will finish it on, on XYZ. And choose with your child which subject is the easiest to start with. So anything that the child enjoys first is always a route for success. So if they're really good at math and they enjoy it, start with math. If they're really good at reading, start with that. That way it kicks it off. It gives them some endorphins. They're excited. They're pumped up for homework, and you have less of a angst while helping them with it, right? So I always say make homework fun for your child. So whatever that looks like for you, just make it fun. Laugh about it. Don't make it so serious. It's really, because you want education no matter if it's because you have a disability or not. You want your child to be excited to learn. Maybe not everything, but excited to learn something. And what I have noticed, and some of the other parents that are in the group have noticed, is that taking 5-minute breaks in between each subject in order to refocus on the next subject is just, it really, really helps. If you In my experience and other parents' experience, if you just continue on, they get frustrated, they get tapped out, they get burnt out, and then they don't want to finish. And what we want to do is promote positive reinforcement. So it was a quick presentation. If you know of any parents that are parents with disabilities or parents that have children with disabilities, even if they are not physically or any other disability related, if they have a child with a disability, they can join this group. If they are a guardian and they have a child with a disability, they can join this group. If they are a guardian with this disability, they can join this group. So you can find us on Facebook. And Facebook group is Momma Chronicles Too 2.0. And the reason why, one thing that we forgot to say is the reason why it's called Momma Chronicles 2 is because as parents with disabilities, we have our own chronicles as well. So people assume that we don't because when, society says we're not supposed to be parents. It's a stigma. And so we wanted to make emphasis on the fact that we have our own chronicles. So TOO as in also. So we thank you for listening. We hope this was helpful. We hope to have people join us on Facebook. We're a growing community. We do much more than that, but this was about back to school. And we really appreciate you, Melissa, for including us and thinking of us.
Sure.
And we're excited. So happy back to school, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Dominique, and thank you, Latoya. I'm so glad you guys were able to be a part of this and share your experience with us. And everyone's experience is so different, whether you're a parent or a member of a school team or a community partner or all of the above. I think what is so important is that we all continue to come together as different people with different perspectives and different lived experiences and just continue having conversations on how we can be supportive of students and each other. I really think that's ultimately what it comes down to. I heard everyone share, all of our presenters tonight, that all of these things really should be student focused. What does your student need? Not everybody's specially designed instruction should be the same. Not every student's IEP's goals should be the same. Not every student's back to school prep should be the same. That we really need to be looking at what is important for the students in our lives and also checking in with them. How are you feeling? I think that's so important to talk to kids about how they're feeling and also share with them how we're feeling. It's okay to say, to our kids, we're nervous, we're anxious, all of those things are valid feelings. Feelings are valid. So I enjoyed all of the conversation tonight, all of the presenters, all of the information. Even though two very different perspectives, one more from the special education legal sense and one more from the parent perspective. But at the end of the day, it really was about supporting student success and how do we come together as a team to do that. Well, again, thank you, Heather, for being here. Thank you, Dominique and Latoya, for being here. We appreciate all of you joining us and being a part of this conversation. Have a great evening, everyone.